It was late afternoon, and I was cleaning my bedroom when I heard the door creak behind me. I turned around, and there was Damon standing in the doorway, staring at the thing in my hands. My heart stopped. How could I explain this? The object was far from innocent. A large, brightly colored toy, one that no polite conversation could sidestep. I had pulled it out of the drawer to dust the back of the cabinet, not thinking much of it. I had locked the door, or so I thought. Damon was my 26-year-old stepson. He wasn't supposed to be home yet. He worked at a local brewery and usually stayed out late with friends after his shifts. But there he was, tall and lean, his dark hair falling into his amused blue eyes. "What's that?" he asked. His voice caught somewhere between curiosity and teasing. My face went red hot. I dropped the item like it had burned me and grabbed the first thing I could find, a throw pillow from the bed, to cover it. "It's none of your business," I stammered, feeling my throat tighten. But his expression didn't change. If anything, he leaned against the door frame, his curiosity growing. "You know, you don't have to act so embarrassed," he said with a small smirk. "It's not like I haven't seen something like that before." I wanted to crawl into a hole. The audacity of this kid, well, man, really, to stand there so casually, completely unfazed while my world spun out of control. I forced a laugh, desperate to diffuse the tension. "Damon, seriously, go mind your own business. You shouldn't even be in here." But he didn't move. For a moment, there was silence between us, heavy and almost unbearable. He wasn't looking at the pillow in my hands anymore. He was looking at me. His gaze was different, not the usual laid-back or playful glances I was used to. This one lingered too long, too intently. It was as if he had peeled back a layer of the person he thought I was, and found someone else entirely. I felt something strange, a flicker of warmth deep in my chest, followed by a sharp pang of guilt. This was wrong. Whatever this was, it was absolutely wrong. I was his stepmother, for God's sake. I was married to his father. I shook my head and broke the silence. "Please, Damon, just go." He finally shrugged, lifting his hands in mock surrender. All right, he said, his tone light again. But before he left, he gave me one last look, a look that sent my already unsettled thoughts into overdrive. As the door closed behind him, I sat down on the edge of the bed, the pillow still clutched against my chest. My heart was racing. I couldn't even bring myself to put the item back into the drawer. It felt like something invisible had shifted in the air between us. And no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, I knew I'd never see Damon the same way again. For the rest of the evening, I couldn't shake the moment from my mind. I tried. I cooked dinner, folded laundry, and even sat next to Vincent on the couch while he flipped through old westerns on the TV. But Damon's face, his amused smirk, and the unsettling glint in his eyes haunted me. Vincent barely noticed my distraction. That was nothing new. He'd been wrapped up in his hobbies, gardening, woodworking, crossword puzzles, for years now, ever since his retirement. I didn't resent him for it. That would have been too easy. But sometimes I felt like more of a live-in caretaker than a wife. At one point, I glanced down the hall and caught Damon's shadow as he moved around in his room. I could hear the faint hum of music coming through his door, a low bass line that didn't match the quiet stillness of the rest of the house. My heart jumped. For no reason I could justify, I turned my attention back to my husband. Vincent was snoring softly, his chin tilted down toward his chest. He'd fallen asleep in his recliner again, the TV still droning on. I thought about waking him, but what would be the point? Instead, I stood and wandered into the kitchen, grateful for a moment of solitude. But I wasn't alone for long. Damon walked in, his bare feet quiet against the hardwood floor. He wore a faded t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair tousled like he'd just run his hands through it. "Hey," he said casually, opening the fridge and grabbing a bottle of water. "You're up late." "I could say the same about you," I replied, keeping my tone light. He smiled, leaning against the counter. "Just unwinding. You know, it's not easy being under this roof sometimes." The comment made me pause. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, but there was a hint of something serious in his expression. "It's nothing. Just living here again, I guess. I feel like I don't fit anymore." I softened at that. Despite everything, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of maternal concern. "It's just temporary, Damon. You'll figure things out. You're smart and capable. You'll land on your feet." "Thanks, Vivian," he said, his voice quieter now. "I appreciate that." For a moment, we stood in silence. The kitchen felt smaller somehow, the space between us shrinking, even though neither of us moved. His eyes lingered on mine. and I felt that same flicker of warmth in my chest again. I cleared my throat and busied myself wiping the counter, desperate to break whatever spell was threatening to take hold. But Damon wasn't finished. About earlier, he started, his tone turning playful again. You don't have to be embarrassed, you know. I mean, we're all human, right? My hand froze mid-wipe and I turned to him, trying to keep my composure. Damon, let's not talk about that. All right, it was an accident, and it's not worth bringing up again. Okay, he said, raising his hands in surrender. But there was a teasing edge in his smile that made my stomach flip. He walked past me then, close enough that I caught a faint whiff of his cologne. I didn't turn around, but I could feel his presence behind me for a moment before he finally... I'd always been able to maintain clear boundaries, lines that weren't meant to be crossed. But Damon had a way of bending those lines, even when he wasn't trying to. And the worst part was, I wasn't sure I wanted him to stop. The next morning, I tried to act normal. I prepared breakfast like I always did. Eggs, toast, and coffee for Vincent, a smoothie for myself. Damon was the last to come into the kitchen, as usual, his hair still damp from a shower. He greeted Vincent with a casual morning, and me with a warm smile that made my pulse quicken. The three of us sat at the table, the clinking of silverware and occasional snippets of conversation filling the air. But underneath it all, I could feel the tension. Every time Damon's hand brushed mine as we passed the salt or refilled coffee, it felt deliberate. I caught him watching me more than once, his gaze steady and unreadable. Vincent, of course, noticed none of this. After breakfast, Damon offered to help me clean up. Normally, he would have disappeared into his room or gone out with friends, so his offer caught me off guard. You don't have to, I said, stacking plates in the sink. I want to, he replied, already grabbing a dish rag. We worked in silence for a while, but the air between us felt charged. At one point, I reached for a glass at the same time he did, and our hands collided. Neither of us pulled away immediately. You're different, he said quietly, his voice just above a whisper. I swallowed hard. What do you mean? He hesitated, his eyes searching mine. I don't know. You don't act like other women your age. I laughed nervously, stepping back to create some distance. Well, that's flattering, I suppose. It's not just that, he continued, his tone serious now. You're real. You actually listen. You see people. The sincerity in his voice took me off guard. I didn't know what to say, so I turned back to the dishes. But as I scrubbed, I felt his presence close behind me. My heart was racing again, and I hated how much I wanted him to stay there. Before I could gather my thoughts, Vincent's voice called from the living room. Vivian, where's my crossword book? The moment shattered. Damon stepped back, giving me a small, knowing smile. I'll let you get back to him, he said, his voice light again. As he walked away, I felt a mix of relief and longing. I knew I was playing with fire, but some part of me couldn't help but reach for the heat. That afternoon, I busied myself with errands, anything to keep my mind occupied. But when I returned home, I found Damon sitting on the porch steps, staring out at the yard. He looked lost in thought, a far cry from the confident young man I was used to seeing. Hey, I said softly as I approached. He looked up, his face breaking into a small smile. Hey, everything all right? He hesitated before answering. Yeah, just thinking. About life, I guess, where I'm headed, where I should be headed. I sat down beside him, keeping a safe distance, but close enough that I could feel the warmth of his presence. You're young, Damon. You don't have to have it all figured out yet. Maybe, he said, his gaze still fixed on the yard. Then, after a pause, he added, You ever feel like you're meant for something different? Like you're trapped in the wrong story? His words hit closer to home than I cared to admit. I wanted to comfort him, to tell him everything would be okay. But the truth was, I didn't believe that myself. Instead, I placed a hand on his shoulder and squeezed gently. You're not trapped, I said, hoping he wouldn't notice the tremor in my voice. For a moment, he covered my hand with his. The gesture felt impossibly intimate. I pulled away quickly, but the damage was done. Another line crossed, another boundary blurred, and I wasn't sure I had the strength to stop it anymore. That evening, the sky turned dark with an oncoming storm. The air hung heavy, as though the world itself was waiting for something to happen. Vincent had gone to bed early, as he often did, complaining about an aching shoulder. I had settled into the living room, a book in hand. But I couldn't focus. The storm outside mirrored the one building within me, something restless, unpredictable, and dangerous. Damon was in the kitchen. The sound of the fridge opening and closing carried through the quiet house. I could hear the faint clink of glass as he poured himself a drink. Moments later, he appeared in the doorway of the living room, holding 2 glasses. "Whiskey?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. I blinked, caught off guard. "I don't usually drink this late." "Well, maybe tonight's an exception." He grinned, handing me a glass without waiting for an answer. I hesitated but took it. The cool glass pressed against my palm. Damon sank into the armchair across from me, stretching his legs out casually. The lamp beside me cast a warm glow across his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his jaw and the faint shadow of stubble on his chin. "What are you reading?" he asked, nodding toward the book in my lap. "Just something light," I replied, holding it up briefly. "Nothing exciting." He smirked. "I find that hard to believe." I laughed softly, taking a sip of the whiskey. It burned, but it was a welcome distraction from the tension that had been building all day. For a while, we sat in comfortable silence. The storm outside grew louder, and then he spoke again, his voice low. "Can I ask you something?" I glanced at him warily. "Depends on what it is." He swirled the liquid in his glass, his eyes fixed on it as though he were gathering his thoughts. "Do you ever feel stuck?" His question startled me. It was eerily similar to the one he'd asked earlier on the porch. But now, there was a different weight to it. "Sometimes," I admitted, my voice quieter than I intended. He looked up then, his eyes meeting mine. "You don't seem like someone who should be stuck. You're too alive for that." I felt my cheeks flush. I looked away, setting my glass down on the coffee table. "Damon, you shouldn't say things like that." "Why not? It's true." His words hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. I stood abruptly, needing to put space between us. "I think it's time we called it a night," I said, avoiding his gaze. But before I could leave the room, the power went out. The sudden darkness was disorienting, and I froze mid-step. "Oh," I muttered, my voice shaky. "It's just the storm," Damon said, his tone calm. I heard him stand, the soft shuffle of his feet on the carpet. "Hold on, I'll find a flashlight." I heard him move closer, the faint rustle of fabric as he passed me. Then, his hand brushed against mine in the dark. I sucked in a sharp breath. "Sorry," he murmured, but he didn't pull away. His hand lingered, warm against mine, and the air between us seemed to shift. I didn't move. I couldn't. My heart was pounding so loudly I was certain he could hear it. "Vivian," he said softly, his voice barely more than a whisper. I turned toward him, even though I couldn't see him in the dark. But I could feel him, his presence, his warmth, his steady breathing. And then, his hand slid up to my wrist, holding it gently. "This is a bad idea," I said, my voice trembling. "I know," he replied, but he didn't let go. The first crack of lightning lit up the room for a brief second, and in that moment, I saw his face. Earnest, vulnerable, impossibly close. And then, he kissed me. At first, it was soft, tentative, as though he was waiting for me to push him away. But I didn't. Instead, I found myself leaning into him, my hands gripping his shirt as though he were the only solid thing in a spinning world. When the lights flickered back on, we broke apart, both of us breathing hard. The reality of what we had just done hit me like a wave. I stepped back, my hands trembling. "This can't happen," I said, shaking my head. Damon didn't argue. He just stood there, his expression unreadable. "I know," he said again, his voice steady. But the damage was done. The next few days were a blur of stolen glances and unspoken words. I avoided Damon as much as I could, throwing myself into chores and errands, anything to keep my mind occupied. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't forget the feel of his lips on mine, or the way his hand had lingered on my wrist. One evening, as I was folding laundry in the guest room, Damon appeared in the doorway. "We need to talk," he said, his voice firm. I didn't look up. "There's nothing to talk about." "Yes, there is." He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. I sighed, setting the laundry down and finally meeting his gaze. "Damon, whatever this is, it has to stop. It's wrong." "Is it?" he asked, his tone challenging. "Because it doesn't feel wrong to me." His words sent a shiver down my spine, but I forced myself to stay calm. "You don't understand. If Vincent ever found out..." "He won't," Damon interrupted. "And even if he did, do you really think he'd care?" He scoffed, shaking his head. "He barely notices you anymore." His words stung, partly because they were true, but that didn't make them right. "This isn't about him," I said, my voice rising. "It's about us. About the fact that this, whatever this is, it can't happen. It's not just wrong, it's impossible." Damon took a step closer, his eyes locked on mine. "Why?" he asked. "Because you're afraid of what people might think, or because you're afraid of what you might think." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. "Vivian," he continued, his voice softer now, "I'm not trying to make this harder for you, but I can't pretend I don't feel something for you, and I don't think you can either." I felt tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. I looked away. "You don't understand," I whispered. "Then explain it to me," he said, his tone pleading. But I couldn't. I couldn't explain the war raging inside me. The guilt, the fear, the longing. So instead, I shook my head and pushed past him, leaving the room without another word. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of Vincent's breathing beside me. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions, none of which I could untangle. At some point, I got up and went to the kitchen, hoping a glass of water would help calm my nerves. But as I stepped into the hallway, I froze. Damon's door was open, and he was standing there, leaning against the door frame as though he'd been waiting for me. "Can't sleep?" he asked, his voice low. I shook my head, unable to find my voice. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. The silence between us was heavy, charged, and then, without thinking, I turned and walked back to my room, closing the door behind me. But even as I lay back down, I knew this wasn't over. Whatever this was, this impossible, dangerous thing between us, it wasn't going away, and I wasn't sure I wanted it to. The next time it happened, there wasn't a storm to blame, nor a flickering light to hide behind. This time, it was deliberate. It started in the laundry room of all places. I was pulling warm towels from the dryer, the mundane rhythm of folding them offering some kind of escape. The house was quiet. Vincent had gone to a friend's house to watch a game, and I thought I had the place to myself. Then, I heard the soft creak of the floorboards behind me. "You're always working," Damon said, his voice light, but laced with something I couldn't quite place. I didn't turn around. "Someone has to," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. He chuckled softly. "Fair enough, but don't you ever get tired of it?" I frowned. "Tired of what?" "Taking care of everything. Taking care of everyone." His voice was quieter now. "When's the last time someone took care of you?" His words cut through me like a knife. I turned then, clutching a folded towel against my chest like a shield. "Damon, I don't think this is a conversation we should be having." "Why not?" He leaned casually against the doorframe. He looked so at ease, so unbothered, but his eyes told a different story. They were sharp, searching, focused on me. "Because," I said, my voice faltering, "it's not appropriate." "Appropriate," he repeated, as though testing the word. "That's not the same as honest, though, is it?" I wanted to argue, to shut him down before he could say anything else that would make this worse. But before I could, he stepped closer, closing the distance between us. "You don't have to pretend with me, Vivian," he said softly. "I see you. I see the way you carry this house. The way you keep everything together while everyone else just takes. Don't you think you deserve something for yourself?" My throat tightened. I shook my head, stepping back until I felt the edge of the counter against my hips. "Damon, whatever this is, it has to stop." He reached out then, his hand brushing against mine. Such a small, simple gesture, but it felt like the ground beneath me was shifting. "Tell me you don't feel it too," he whispered. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out, because I couldn't tell him. I couldn't lie to him, or to myself. And then, just like that night in the living room, he kissed me. But this time, I didn't stop him. The days that followed were a blur of stolen moments and whispered secrets. We were careful, or at least we thought we were. Damon was good at finding excuses to linger in the same room as me, offering to help with dinner, fixing a broken cabinet door, even volunteering to run errands with me. At first, it was thrilling, the rush of something forbidden, but the reality of our situation weighed heavily on me. I knew it couldn't last. I knew it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. One afternoon, as I was putting away groceries, Damon came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. I stiffened, glancing toward the doorway to make sure no one was there. Damon, I hissed, trying to pull away. Vincent could walk in any minute. He's at the hardware store, Damon said, his voice calm. Relax. But I couldn't relax. Not anymore. The paranoia was starting to eat away at me. Every time Vincent looked at me, I wondered if he knew. Every time Brenda, our nosy neighbor, waved at me from across the street, I felt like she could see right through me. We need to talk, I said, turning to face Damon. About what? He asked, his expression unreadable. About this, about us. His jaw tightened. For the first time, I saw a flicker of anger in his eyes. What about us? This has to stop, I said, forcing the words out. It's too risky. It's not fair to Vincent. Fair to Vincent, Damon repeated, his voice rising. What about fair to you? Do you even hear yourself? You're so busy worrying about him that you don't even think about what you want. What I want doesn't matter, I snapped. It's not about me. That's bullshit. Damon's voice was sharp now, his frustration spilling over. You deserve to be happy, Vivian. You deserve to be with someone who actually sees you. The words hung in the air, heavy, unrelenting. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but I couldn't. Because deep down, I knew he was right. The breaking point came a few weeks later. Vincent had invited Brenda and her husband over for dinner. I was doing my best to play the role of the perfect hostess. But Brenda's sharp eyes seemed to be on me all night. And I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew something. After dinner, as I was cleaning up in the kitchen, Brenda cornered me. You've been awfully distracted lately, she said, her tone casual, but her eyes probing. I forced a smile. Just busy. You know how it is. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. Does Vincent know? I froze. My heart pounded in my chest. Know what? She shrugged, her expression unreadable. Whatever's going on with you and Damon. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, my voice shaking. Brenda smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Just be careful, Vivian. Secrets have a way of coming out. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop replaying Brenda's words in my mind. I felt trapped, caught between two worlds that couldn't coexist. The next morning, Damon found me in the garden, pulling weeds with more force than necessary. You're avoiding me, he said, his voice steady but tinged with frustration. I'm trying to protect us, I replied, not looking up. Protect us from what? He stepped closer. From this blowing up in our faces, I said, standing and wiping my hands on my jeans. Brenda knows, Damon. She knows. He frowned, his expression darkening. How could she know? I don't know, but she does, I said, my voice rising. And if she tells Vincent... She won't, he said firmly. You don't know that, I snapped. You don't understand how dangerous this is. Damon grabbed my hand, his grip strong but not painful. What I understand is that I don't want to lose you. The raw emotion in his voice caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. You won't, I said finally, my voice barely more than a whisper. But we have to be careful, for both our sakes. The days that followed were tense. Brenda didn't say anything to Vincent, at least not that I knew of, but the weight of her suspicion hung over me like a cloud. Damon tried to reassure me, but even he seemed more on edge than usual. Then, one evening, Vincent came home earlier than expected. I was in the laundry room with Damon, the two of us standing closer than we should have been, when we heard the front door open. We sprang apart like guilty teenagers. Vivian, Vincent called, his voice carrying through the house. In here, I replied, my voice steady despite the panic rising in my chest. Vincent appeared in the doorway. His eyes swept over the room. For a moment, I thought he was going to say something. But then, he just nodded. Dinner ready? Almost, I said quickly. He left without another word. But the look he gave me lingered long after he was gone. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment in the laundry room, the way Vincent's eyes had lingered on me just a second too long. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. And yet, despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to end it. Whatever this was between Damon and me, it felt too big, too consuming, to simply walk away from. But deep down, I knew the storm wasn't over. It was just beginning. It started with Vincent coming home unexpectedly early. But this time, it wasn't just the timing that caught me off guard. His face was tight, his expression unreadable. As he stepped into the house, and set his briefcase down with a deliberate thud. "Damon," Vincent called, his voice sharp enough to make my stomach drop. Damon appeared in the hallway moments later, his casual demeanor contrasting Vincent's obvious tension. "What's up?" he asked, leaning against the wall, hands in his pockets. Vincent's eyes narrowed. "We need to talk. Now." The tone in his voice left no room for argument. Damon glanced at me briefly, concern flickering in his eyes, before following Vincent into the living room. I stood frozen in the kitchen, my heart pounding. And then I heard Vincent's voice, cold, unforgiving. "I know what's been going on." "Victor, you're imagining things," Damon said, his voice steadier than I thought possible. "There's nothing going on." "Don't lie to me," Vincent roared. And the sound of something, a glass maybe, shattering followed. I couldn't stay hidden any longer. I stepped into the doorway, my hands trembling. "Vincent, stop." Both men turned to me, their expressions polar opposites. Vincent's face was a storm of anger and betrayal. Damon's, something closer to defiance. "Vivian," Vincent said, his voice quieter now, but no less dangerous. "Tell me the truth. Is there something going on between you two?" I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. My silence was answer enough. Vincent laughed bitterly, running a hand through his thinning hair. "I knew it," he said, his voice cracking. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew. "Vincent, please," I began, stepping closer. "Don't," he snapped, holding up a hand. "And don't try to explain it. There's nothing you can say that will make this okay." The room fell into a tense silence. The only sound was the slow, rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, Vincent turned to Damon, his eyes blazing. "You're out," he said coldly. "Pack your things and leave tonight." Damon stood his ground, his jaw tightening. "I'm not going anywhere." "Yes, you are," Vincent shot back. "You're not going to stay under my roof and disrespect me like this." "I think you should calm down," Damon said, his tone low but firm. That only made Vincent angrier. He stepped closer to Damon, his fists clenched at his sides. "Don't tell me to calm down, you little—" "Stop it," I shouted, stepping between them. "Both of you, just stop." Vincent turned to me, his eyes filled with hurt. "How could you, Vivian?" His voice broke. "After everything I've done for you." "I didn't mean for this to happen," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I never wanted to hurt you." "Well, you did." His words were bitter. "And now I have to live with the fact that my own wife and my own son—" He broke off, shaking his head. "I can't even say it." Damon reached for my hand, but I pulled away. I couldn't handle his touch. Not now, not with Vincent watching. "I think it's best if I leave," I said quietly. Vincent stared at me. His face hardened. "You're not going anywhere," he said firmly. "This is my house. If anyone's leaving, it's him." "Vincent," I started, but he cut me off. "No, I don't want to hear it." His voice trembled with barely contained rage. "You've made your choice, Vivian, and now you're going to live with the consequences." Damon left that night. He packed a bag without a word, his movements tense and mechanical. I followed him to the driveway, my heart breaking with every step. "I'm sorry," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. He turned to me, his expression softer than I expected. "This isn't over," he said, his voice steady. "You know that, right?" I nodded, but I didn't say anything, because as much as I wanted to believe him, I wasn't sure if it was true. As his car disappeared down the street, I felt an ache deep in my chest, a mix of guilt, loss, and something I couldn't quite name. The days that followed were unbearable. Vincent barely spoke to me. His silence was more punishing than any words could have been. I threw myself into household tasks, desperate to keep busy, but nothing could distract me from the emptiness I felt. And then, a week later, the letter arrived. It was from Damon. No return address, just my name, written in his familiar handwriting. I opened it with trembling hands, my heart pounding as I unfolded the paper. "Vivian, I know things are complicated right now, but I need you to know that I meant what I said. This isn't over. I don't care what anyone else thinks or says. I can't just walk away from you. I won't. When you're ready, I'll be waiting. Always. D." I read the letter 3 times, my hands shaking. Part of me wanted to tear it up, to burn it, and pretend it never existed. But another part of me, a part I didn't want to admit to, clung to his words like a lifeline. That night, I tucked the letter into the back of my dresser drawer, hiding it away, like a secret I wasn't ready to share with the world. because deep down, I knew Damon was right. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot.